My name's Mark Robinson, and I consider myself extremely fortunate to be just entering my 7th decade. I've been married to Susan for 46 years and have a grown-up son and a grown-up daughter. The entry to my 6th decade was entirely different from the current one. I had two polar opposite life events on my 59th year. One was to be told I was to be expecting a first grandson, and the other was to be told I was diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma. I've lived in the Bradford area most of my life and been very active, no other health issues, and quite a background of activity and exercise before the diagnosis. Looking back over the decade plus, it's quite difficult to pinpoint an individual event. But I did have some of the classic symptoms. I was quite an active walker. We were undertaking a journey up a long distance footpath called the Dales Way. Starts just round the corner from here in Ilkley and ends up in Bowness on Windermere. Really, really beautiful walk up Wharfdale. But for some reason, I wasn't enjoying things. I was finding it quite an effort to get going and keep going. And looking back, I think energy levels had gone, appetite levels had dropped a little bit. But one of the key things I remember was a colleague at work, just around a photocopier, normal routine, and said, "Now you look a bit off colour." Standard phrase, but in actual fact, I literally did look off colour. Eyes had yellowed, and it was the jaundice beginning to take effect. Now, I should say that I'm fortunate to have a brother-in-law who's been a GP for 35, 40 years, and he's always been a sounding board. So naturally, we ran things past him and suggested, well, a blood test, nip down to your local surgery. And that happened. I should say, retrospectively, we found out that during 40 years of GP routine work, my brother-in-law said he'd never ever come across a case of cholangiocarcinoma, which struck me as being obviously something quite significant. The GP blood test, I can remember, was carried out on a Friday, and I'm phoned up on Saturday morning, and told to get down to Bradford Royal Infirmary where they have an admissions award. So I'm sitting there with people with acute appendicitis and wondering what on earth I'm doing there. And was told that bilirubin levels, that's the amount of bile in your blood, were very, very high, and I was admitted. A couple of days of tests, one an endoscopic procedure, tried to glean results from the person carrying out the test. I was quiet, we must wait and see. And then a couple of days later, we a family members visiting, and overcomes what I can recall as being a young doctor with quite a difficult task of informing me that it was cholangiocarcinoma. No idea what this meant, but I can recall the actual breaking of the news as being really, really different from anything else I'd experienced before. Fortunately, my son's professional duties mean that he's trained in breaking bad news to families and things. So he was able to take over and spread the word down the family. This, was quite serious. So a worried few days until I met the lower gastrointestinal surgeon, a specialist, who straight away I sensed a different approach. He seemed to suggest there was a route through this and a route out of the other side. Much more confident, and there are things we can do. And it was due to the fact that the area had developed quite an advanced multidisciplinary team approach. So all the hospitals in West Yorkshire would present cases. And the specialist was quite convinced that my case would lead to a route to somewhere called the Bexley Wing at St James's Hospital in Leeds. Now, if you're ever going to be treated for anything really serious, the Bexley Wing at St James's is the place to go. It's a wonderful, airy building. There's a grand piano in the entrance hall. There are artwork on the walls, and it's just such an uplifting place. So I was able to, I knew the reputation, and I knew it was an advanced liver specialist centre. So I really experienced the best of the NHS during my treatment. Well, quite remarkably, that I had really close family member, my mother-in-law, Alice, in the 1980s. Fit lady, very much like myself, very active. Suddenly jaundice, suddenly lost weight, suddenly began to itch all over. And she was diagnosed with, it was mentioned as liver cancer then, there wasn't the specialist division to bile duct cancer. And she suffered really, really quite badly. She had 6 months of a real difficult ending. And again, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law were medical people, were really useful then. But we watched her die at the age of 64. And it had always been a case that the family said, oh, Alice died far, far too young. And then I found myself 5 years younger than Alice in exactly the same position. You look for other links as well. I had a jaundiced father in the Second World War who missed some of the Italy campaign due to being hospitalised, and was there a connection there? And I can remember people saying, you live in Grimsby, have you worked in chemical industry? Kind of a random searching for answers. Now I've got my diagnosis here for the medically minded. The diagnosis was as follows: PT3, N1, V1, R1. There were 5 of 17 lymph nodes involved, and it's a poorly differentiated adenocarcinoma of the distal bile duct. Didn't mean a great deal to me, but I realised the lymph node involvement was quite serious. That moved it up a stage from what I could understand. The distal common bile duct part didn't mean a great deal to me, but again, subsequently, that meant it was outside the liver, extrahepatic, as opposed to intrahepatic, and that increases my chances quite significantly. Well, I had to go and get the bilirubin levels down quite a considerable bit, and then we went along to the St James Hospital and met the head of the unit there, and straight away a Whipple operation. A Whipple operation again meant nothing to me. The name sounded quite interesting, and belongs to an ex-Surgeon General of the United States called Alan Whipple, and he developed this procedure for replumbing your lower gastrointestinal. It sounded very complicated, and a lot of medical people remember the operation being shared in the late 60s, early 70s. Mine was carried out by a man called Mr. Krishna Menon, who I found out later was just about perfecting a laparoscopic procedure. Mine involved quite an incision, and a considerable operation of reconnecting, losing your duodenum and reconnecting bits and parts of your digestive system. And I did join a chat group called the Whipple Warriors, where we had quite a bit of banter about whether you had a cut that was north-south or east-west. And I remember that quite clearly after the operation. On the initial diagnosis, there were a range of services offered through leaflets, possible groups that met and chat things through. But right from the offset, I found that my condition was kind of outside of their remit. Or I remember having to explain my circumstances to them more often than they were able to assist me. There were no individuals or families who could share their experience, and as well, my path to treatment was quite rapid, so there wasn't a period of uncertainty and looking for answers. So those services were not particularly appealing in the first instance. I do recall vividly going on to Googling and finding a Wikipedia page, and the phrase still sticks out of it being, and it's still there, I checked it recently, of an incurable and rapidly lethal malignancy. Now, to read that, it sounded like a death sentence, literally. Little did I realise I could have read on a bit further, and there was a little bit more optimistic information. 10 years ago as well, it was hard to find things, smartphones weren't as smart as they were. But I did come across AMMF, which was on the same page, I remember, and straight away you found an organisation that kind of asked the questions that you wanted to ask. And at that time, I remember Helen and her team were busy encouraging people to get second opinions, to educate their GPs about the condition. And those two circumstances didn't really apply to me. I was diagnosed fairly quickly, but there was a bit of hope around the AMMF, and they were looking for solutions and hopefully extending the knowledge about the circumstances. I also was offered, when you have a tumour, you think operation and a bit of chemo to mop up the outlying bits and pieces. In 2010, that wasn't always the case. Chemo was offered in some places, not in others. And I was offered to take part in a trial called the BILCAP trial, University of Southampton. I was well enough after the surgery, and I got randomised onto the arm of treatment that had the chemo. So I had 10 cycles of capecitabine. So the BILCAP trial, biliary capecitabine, and took a long time to get enough people on board, and took a long time to report. But I was really pleased that in 2016-17 we were able to say that it was effective and that people should be offered capecitabine as part of the routine follow-up after resection. So that bit was really, really rewarding. Well, I can recall very few major obstacles. I tolerated the chemo really quite well. Recovery from the operation was under as expected. I did think, oh crikey, I've eaten my last fish and chips, so I'll never manage a deep pan pizza again. But my diet's gone back to exactly what it was before. I take something called a creon tablet, which is an enzyme, before each meal. But there's nothing now that I don't eat and enjoy that I did before. An obstacle, thinking about obstacles, not really an obstacle, but Mr. Menon, who carried out the surgery, moved to London. And sort of halfway through my 5-year period, he disappeared and a replacement came. And interesting to think about how you lose that contact with the person who effectively saved your life. But on the other hand, the new replacement didn't know me personally, but he was very much of the opinion that get on and enjoy your life. Don't keep coming back and asking for scans, and you will know when circumstances have changed. And I felt that was quite useful in hindsight. Well, of course, we had this family connection, mother-in-law that I mentioned. So the impact on the family was of a major concern. I'm fortunate that one of the family members took it upon herself to just feed in the good news to Susan, and so I can remember pictures of guys who'd had a Whipple and they'd just finished a half marathon, and one sticks out in my mind. A guy was cutting in the grass on a tractor, and he'd had a Whipple as well, and various emails were exchanged. So I was fortunate having a member of the family who just fed in the good news. And I found the American Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation have a good news section. And I went on there quite regularly and read of people who had survived for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and put some posts on there myself as well. I had this medical connection with my brother-in-law, and he sat in on most appointments, said nothing, but in the way back on the car, I say, what was that all about? And he'd try and explain it as best he could. Also had a contact with an anaesthetist, and he came before the operation and said, you'll wake up in ICU and you'll have tubes coming all over the place, and there'll be machines beeping. That's to be expected, and that was a great help as well. So I think as well, the rest of I managed to get the rest of the family to say, well, whatever happened, the outcomes are for me. The rest of the family were able to convince me that they would be okay. I didn't have to kind of be concerned about them. And I found that a great help as well. I'm back to where I was before. I've got to be totally honest about this. There's nothing now that I don't do that I did before, perhaps a little bit slower. The grandson that Julie arrived just after the operation, followed by 3 other grandsons and a granddaughter, he's now moving on to secondary school, which is quite a thought. Susan and I have really been involved hands-on with all 5 of the grand. They live nearby. Even in these difficult times, we've been, walking, running, back to swimming with them. So we do that because of CC rather than in spite of it, I think is how I would put it. I have read, and I do agree, that some individuals suggest 2 lives, one before a severe diagnosis and one afterwards. And I do think there's some truth in that. Fairly simply, seek out the good news. AMMF, American information as well. Get your strength from the medical professionals. They're the ones who are going to fight this thing for you. You just lay back and let them do their best. And the last thing I think is remember that your chance of a return to good health increases with every day, week, month that you progress from your treatment. And I found those 3 things top of my list. Well, I've been to AMMF conferences, and I think it's fantastic, all the money that's raised through running and swimming and climbing, and to see the researchers as well. And hopefully the researchers see that their work is affecting real life people. Well, I had the fortune of an early diagnosis and an operable tumour and a return to a former lifestyle. And I'm often presented as somebody who had a really, really serious diagnosis, and look at him now. And that's fine, that's okay, that's good. It's always difficult to hear of people who are diagnosed who are much younger. I daily walk past the house of a lady whose daughter was in the same class as my granddaughter, and she wasn't as fortunate as me, and she's passed away. And so I pass the house daily and think, how come I've survived and she didn't? I'd like to see sports presenters on Sky Television wearing badges that promote AMMF as well as prostate cancer, and that can be a bit frustrating, but that's central to AMMF and all its aims in the future.